Hey, good morning. It's Patricia Murphy. It's Thursday. This is Seattle Now. High drama unfolded this week over the future of Washington's political battle lines. A redistricting committee missed its midnight deadline to redraw the state's congressional and legislative maps. Now, for the first time, it'll go to the state Supreme Court. I'll talk to Jim Brunner of the Seattle Times about how this happened. But first, some headlines. Speaking of the state Supreme Court, the AP reports they've turned down a case that sought to publicly name the SPD officers who were in D.C. during the insurrection, January 6th. 2 officers were fired after an internal investigation found they broke the law. Their identities have been reported. The remaining 4, who weren't found to have broken any laws, have sued to keep their names out of public records requests. Now the case goes back to a lower court. An attorney for the records requesters says they'll keep fighting to make the information public. Meanwhile, Seattle-based Zillow is being sued over its decision to shutter its house flipping business. The company announced 2 weeks ago it was ending its Zillow Offers unit. A federal lawsuit filed on behalf of a stockholder accuses the company of misleading investors about its ability to predict the market and driving up share prices. And there could be more lawsuits. Seattle Times reports that at least 2 other law firms are asking shareholders to come forward. And baseball great Ichiro Suzuki is on deck for the Mariners Hall of Fame. The 10-time All-Star will be the 10th player inducted by the M's. There'll be a ceremony next summer at T-Mobile Park. The buzz is that Ichiro could be elected to the National Baseball Hall of Fame when he's eligible in 2025. Ichiro played 28 seasons of baseball. His career started in the Japan Pacific League. He then went on to Seattle, New York, and Miami.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sarah Augustine, the chair of the Washington State Redistricting Commission, and I want to welcome you to this public meeting.
This was supposed to be a big week for Washington state politics nerds. Monday at midnight was the deadline to wrap up Washington's redistricting process, a once every 10 years realignment. It's when our U.S. House District and State House District maps get drawn. I know, exciting stuff. There was a public Zoom meeting that started at 7 o'clock where there was supposed to be an announcement about these new maps. Seattle Times reporter Jim Brunner was there.
Well, that was a real fun night.
The commission has 4 people, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. At least 3 people on the commission had to agree on the plan. And at first, it seemed like they were going to get there.
And they had said, we think we're on track.
I think I'll echo what Commissioner Fain said. We're working hard on some map proposals and hope to have something really soon that we can come back and share. Feel really optimistic about where we are right now.
And the people at the virtual public meeting kept waiting for updates.
And they went into the meeting, but then they immediately adjourned into what they call caucuses. So they weren't there at the table negotiating in public at this public meeting. They were going off on their own and we couldn't see what was going on. And then every half hour or so, they would come back and say, we're still negotiating, or staff would say they're still negotiating.
Hi there, folks. Just checking in with our caucuses once again. How's it going?
I'm happy to start, if that's okay with my fellow commissioners, and just say that we are hard at work reviewing maps.
Hours went by like this.
And it became clear as we approached midnight that they were just running out of time. And in the end, they had this really bizarre moment at the end where they came in with just minutes to spare, literally down to the final seconds, really, before midnight. And they voted on what they said were new maps.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, terrific. Great job, everybody. Congratulations. I will now adjourn this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But they didn't show the maps. You know, it later became apparent that they didn't actually meet the deadline.
Do you have a sense of why it was so difficult to reach an agreement? Did you think it would go this way?
I mean, everything's so polarized in politics now nationally that I kind of thought maybe this is the year that the bipartisan commission that Washington's had for decades, like, doesn't work. You know, it just seems like there's a lot of the base of both parties that doesn't trust the other party. I think that they did really try to come to an agreement. I kind of expected that maybe they would. They had to agree on both, a set of 10 congressional district maps and then also the 49 legislative districts. So there's a lot of moving parts. And I think in the end, it was the legislative districts that were more up in the air and that they couldn't come to an agreement on.
You and I both know how important redistricting is, but it's the type of power that isn't always visible to people. It's the power that has the potential, though, to shape so many issues. Explain for listeners what's at stake here.
Well, pretty much any big picture issue that you care about is at stake indirectly here. I mean, the control of the legislature can be determined by these political maps, which cities get to vote, what's the partisan makeup of these various districts. And when these commissioners are drawing these lines, as they do in every other state, they have the data on how the various neighborhoods down to the precinct performed politically. So you can look at the maps and say, they're shifting it from 59% Democratic to 54% Democratic or whatever. And so we all know that the political parties have different priorities. And so if you flash to Congress, for example, we have at least one district, the 8th Congressional District, which is a swing district held by the Republicans since it was created, won by Democrat Kim Schreier a few years back. That's a swing district again. And so that could be one of the districts that control of the U.S. House comes down to. And when you think about control of the U.S. House, you're talking about everything from, how are we going to tax people in various income brackets? Are we going to maintain this infrastructure spending push? Is there going to be a push to maintain some of the Democratic priorities like paid family leave, helping people out with childcare costs, keeping abortion legal in some instances, or putting more restrictions on it? Every issue that you can think about is indirectly affected by this redistricting.
There were issues about whether South Seattle neighborhoods would stay paired with the 9th Congressional District and whether to draw majority Latino legislative districts in the central part of the state.
Yeah, these were definitely some of the issues that came down to the wire. There were a lot of groups testifying, in favor of both of those proposals, saying that there are communities of color that have historically been kind of locked out of having, being able to elect the representatives that would be of their choosing if they were the majority in districts. Of course, no group is monolithic. You never know how exactly they're going to vote, but there were arguments about, for example, the Federal Voting Rights Act and Democrats Commission and Analysis saying that we have to create a majority citizen voting age Latino district in central Washington, or we could face a lawsuit. And they really pushed that. The Republicans, I think, were willing to give some on that, but not go quite as far. And those are some of the things that were blowing up at the end, and they couldn't quite reach an agreement. And I think that, there's some thought that it's possible that the Democrats thought, well, we'll just throw it to the state Supreme Court.
A punt, perhaps.
Yeah. And we should say, that's what happens now. I mean, because they didn't reach agreement, it does go to the state Supreme Court. And those 9 justices get to draw the maps. They can start from scratch, or they could take the 99% agreement that the commissioners kind of had and say, yeah, well, we'll take that into account. But it's a real wild card.
In some states, one political party controls the maps. Here in Washington, we have this independent commission, like you said, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. How does that shape how the state's process works here? Yeah,
that's interesting because our process, this bipartisan commission, you kind of forces compromise. It's been held up in the past as maybe a better system than if you're wherever, North Carolina, and one party just blatantly gerrymanders all the districts just for, pure partisan advantage. And then there's a bunch of lawsuits by the minority party. We had some situations that were similar to that. I think in the 70s, there were some maps drawn by the legislature that the courts basically invalidated. And so politicians back then got tired of that. And they said, let's come together and create a bipartisan commission. It'll be a lot better. We can find a compromise. And for a lot of the history of the state, we've gone back and forth between Republican and Democratic control legislature. So it made a lot of sense. And it worked, 1991, 2001, 2011, it all worked those times. This time it didn't work for the first time.
And again, you tip to the polarization of the political climate right now and how difficult this may have been because of that.
Yeah, we still are learning more about what was going on behind the scenes. I don't think that these commissioners were particularly the most, rabidly partisan like you see maybe in some other states. I think there was an opportunity for compromise. I think they did try to find one. They ran out of time in the end. And what they did in that final meeting just made it kind of tarnish the entire process.
You know, you mentioned this at the beginning, but let's talk about it now. A lot of this work was done behind closed doors. What do you think is going on here, and why not be transparent?
Yeah, I mean, that's always been somewhat of a feature of these commissions. They're not going to do everything in public, but they are a creation of the state, and they are subject to the Open Public Meetings Act. And what they were trying to do is skirt around the letter of the law of the Open Meetings Act. And they were saying, well, if there's only two of us meeting at a time, then it's not a majority, so it's not a problem. But, we talked to some government transparency experts who said, well, that may have violated the actual letter of the law. It certainly violated the spirit of the Open Meetings Act.
Okay, now it heads to the Washington State Supreme Court. It's going to have to decide how these maps will get drawn. This hasn't happened before. Do you have any indication about how this may go?
I don't have a great indication yet. What we do know is that the Supreme Court has until April 30th. So there's a potential really long delay here that is going to affect all these people who might be running for office, whether it's incumbents or challengers. They don't know what their district is necessarily going to look like. I think there's a strong possibility that the Supreme Court will take the work of the commission and say, we're going to use this as a basis. There was a lot of public testimony that went into it. There was a lot of analysis and work that went into it, but they're under no requirement to do that. So the first question is the court going to act quickly, or are they going to step back and say, no, we're going to start our own process over? And then what will that look like? Will there be a chance for more public testimony, or will the court just kind of cloister behind closed doors and put out some maps next April?
Right. They have until April to come up with their maps. Jim, is there something we can learn about how all this went down? What does it say about where we're at?
I think it just raises a lot of questions about whether the redistricting, commission process needs to be modified or reformed. I think certainly you could make an argument, and many people have been emailing me, people have been discussing this on social media, that there's no way that you should have a deadline that's coming up and this commission voting on something that they never show to the public. And then it turns out they didn't even really have an agreement, really. At 11:59 p.m., they should probably have a deal where they have to post the final public proposal and maybe have a chance, 72 hours, something like that, for the public to look at it and then take a final vote and have a final debate in public, and not do this hasty vote that just left everybody of many political stripes who were looking at it shaking their heads.
And it's never a good idea to make reporters stay up till midnight and then not deliver something.
Cranky reporters, and then they weren't doing interviews yesterday. I mean, it's a bad look. And it's, I think that these commissioners are volunteer, basically. It's not a full-time job. They all had other jobs. But I think that a lot of times people take these positions because they want to be involved, and B, maybe they want to pad their resume a little bit and say, look, I was part of this big important decision. Well, this kind of takes the shine off that for them.
Yeah. Jim Brunner, political reporter for the Seattle Times. We will follow your coverage. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening today. Caroline Chamberlain Gomez produced today's show, which is also made by Clare McGrane, Jenny Cecil Moore, Diana Opong, and Jason Pagano. Matt Jorgensen does our theme music. I'm Patricia Murphy.